So to be able to do that, what is really required is application of formal knowledge, where this becomes a structured discourse. I mean, that again, tomorrow we'll probably dig down more into the structure of knowledge and all that. Uh, and then the perspective of evolution again means basically what we have seen as evolution in the West becomes the de facto, based on which the current ideal is proven to be the best ideal. It's not really applied to any other society. And the bigger challenge is tradition on our side being in a preservation mode, not in a synthesis mode, which is basically generation of new knowledge is not happening in the inner sheath. There is always knowledge getting generated, but the formal knowledge is not getting generated. So there are other practical problems like assumptions. What are the dichotomies that we assume? Right, left, secular, religious, all these things are probably mostly well known. So, which probably why again all these challenges can be stated as opportunities. How can we come up with a theoretical framework where all this becomes structured discourse instead of a wish-based discourse? So can we synthesize futuristic thought based on such a framework? So what I am after is not really defining a theory, but a frame within which theories can be generated, refuted, and evolved. And bringing these subjects into the ambit of formal traditional knowledge. So this probably, should we do it tomorrow or?
This is where we get into IKS.
Okay. Yeah. So are there really our ideals based on which a system can be defined, and which of them are really existent or outdated, whatever? A very good example for us is the questionnaire of the rishis. Whenever any seer goes to any king, what are the questions he asks? Are people, innocent people, fearless in your country? Are criminals really afraid of your rule of law? Basic questions. And nothing really that beats, you can say that which is temporal. Each of those applies as a permanent basis on which a kingdom could be or any governing structure could be derived.
Questions to Bharat before Padukas being taken.
Everybody.
Entire discourse is completely that administrative.
Are people able to pursue their fulfillment?
Are judges acquitting
Impartial. So it's an uninterrupted tradition. Basically, the six Chakravartis, then Rama, then Yudhishthira, your
sovereign was answerable,
Vikramarka,
accountable also.
and which are similar to the discourses that you see under Vijayanagara also. Right, so that continuity is there. Now, can this really work in a futuristic model? What prevents us? Basically, the ideal is good. It is the model that is problematic.
Call it ideal or utopian.
It is still an ideal even if we can't hit it. But is it really so impractical to have a governing structure based on these ideals? Well, that's what the question comes down to. And there the question of practicality is not really as much of can we incorporate those ideals into the existing system, because any of that ideal coming into this system only gets digested towards the most opposite type of results, which we have seen. So what exactly we got to go to the drawing board. I don't think we can try to reform the current structure to fulfill those ideals. I mean, there are attempts, but I don't think that. Now that the topic of equality came some time ago, is it again really just a slogan, or are we really defining what exactly it means? It's not as if Indian society is. Do we have equality?
Any society.
Do we have the concept of equality? We do have. I mean, Dharmaraja is a Samvarti. The principle is to impart law, enforce law impartially. But what is the nature of that? Right? I mean, is it really considering both the subject and the object and the principle? Or is it independent of the subject and the principle getting applied uniformly? So again, we'll have to break it down to elements so that the problem is stated in a more accurate way.
There, I do have one question which might be little off the track, but still. So when we are saying Bharatiya ideals, we are talking about ideals that are presented by Bharatiya people for Bharatiya people, or these are ideals um, proposed by Bharatiya people, but they are valid for humanity, in the sense that when we are saying Bharatiya ideals, is it only for Bharatiya people or this is true for humanity?
Which is what we'll have to state basically.
Yeah. So
I mean, I do believe that they can be applied for humanity if stated in the right way.
yeah, yeah. So this, because sometimes when we say, and this question has come again and again at different places, when we say Indian psychology, for example, in our discussions, then is this psychology of Indian people or this is psychology discovered by Indians but applicable for humanity? The reason why I am trying to put this question is also West never said that this is European ideals. They just said that these are ideals. That means they de facto assume that the world will follow these ideals. And I mean, this might be a mechanism of conquering others, or this might be their way of thinking that पूरी दुनिया ही ऐसे सोचेगी.
They were virtually ruling the world.
Yeah. So in other words, when we are saying Bharatiya ideals,
We'll also do it. No, the context is we are having a system in front of us which we are critiquing, and then we are trying to build something. So that contrast is required right now in the discourse.
But that's an important point. I think the point that you raised as to who does this ideal belong to and who claims ownership of it and who in fact propagates it in any name. And I'll give you an example which is very current and which comes from the realm of cultural heritage. World heritage sites in India, how many are there? Any idea? So I think there's 26. So who decides world heritage? UNESCO, which I did some work for. How does it do it? It says, here are our guidelines as to what you say about what is in your territory. And then if we are satisfied with that, we will put it on the list and we will inscribe it, and then you are free to say that this particular site or monument or ruin or natural landscape then is on a UNESCO list. But what has happened then is that the describing of it is done according to terms that are not yours. But you have agreed to it. And therefore, this is called world heritage. Or in the case of intangible heritage, there used to be a thing called masterpieces of humanity. Now, who decides what a masterpiece is? In this case, in the case of intangible heritage, it was a group of predominantly European and North American experts who did that. Of course, there was no protest, not even the slightest protest from any of the countries which had elements which in fact were a part of the masterpieces. So that was acquiescence by them. But every single country, including ours, is still falling over each other every single year to get more and more of their cultural heritage into these lists. And this is something that, when it struck me as to what was happening, I was saying, what's going on? Why are we doing this following an international line, as they say, a normative principle, which is designed by experts, not ours, who are saying, describe what you have and give it to us so that we can present it to the world as being part of world heritage. Makes no sense, but it's still happening.
So those were the challenges. Now, what are we going to do about it? This is broadly.
Summary from the previous slide that there are Bharatiya ideals, right? Basically, that's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. Basically, these are the ideals. We know that we have ideals. We also know that these ideals have a basis in our axiomatic sources. We also have knowledge that they have worked under certain circumstances. And we also understand that they can be futuristic based on a good model that they are applied to. So how do we go about the design? And primarily, scope remains future global collective systems with specific focus on Bharata. Our first job is to be able to show that it works for us before it can apply anywhere. Then approach wise, our main approach is going to be that of architecture, basically envisage the macro within which all these institutions, including state, fall. How does the society operate? How does the state operate? How does the time elements operate? How do the space elements operate? So each of those elements become independent research problems whose solutions actually build into the macro. So it's basically we can both break down as well as integrate. Ontologically, this 4-level view is something that we came up with, which we think is the best way to look at things. Based on what we have just discussed, doctrine cannot be changed in the current structures unless we have a overthrow by revolution. So the ambit, bringing that into the ambit of structured discourse means we will have not a 3-level but 4-level model. We'll just see what it is in a few minutes. Theory generation will require, this system has to be evolutionary with these spirals of define, develop, socialize, apply, basically the feedback and then refine. But importantly, state all these problems at a universal level so that their solutions become workable and sustainable in both space and time. And we'll have to break down each of these into the most base level elements. Let us say economy is there. Exactly what is it that we are up to if we want to? Is it simply building a good economy, or is the goal fulfillment of individuals and collectives where the economy is the byproduct? Exactly how are we stating it? Is it optimization of manpower that we are after, or optimization of resource? State it precisely so that the objective of the system is more clear. A system, I mean, our proposal is all the systems, whether cosmic level or social or state or any system, can be seen in 4 levels: the worldview, doctrine, architecture or institutional, and lived reality, where things are operative and visible. So again, this has an axiomatic source. It's not as if we have come up with this. For instance, the Purusha Sukta says, right, the Padasya Vishwa Bhutani Tripadasya Amritan Devi. Whatever is visible is the manifest reality, is only the 4th leg of the fourfold. The 3 are invisible and immortal also. It is immortal because that immortal is the source or the cause of the mortal, which is basically coming and going, whatever is visible. And this, another piece of the axiomatic source, which is basically the fourfold description of divinity. I mean, this is another misconception that we have summary, philosophical summary in the Upanishads. Basically, Upanishads are more elaborate descriptions of what is told in seed form in the Samhita. So the Mandukya, entire Mandukya is about this fourfold, right? Which is basically the gross, subtle, causal, and eternal. So the subtle or the level 2 is the cause of the gross. This is the effect. What is visible is the effect, but what is it? How is it coming about? Through the workings of the system. And how is the system working? Based on the ideals for which the system is designed. And how are those ideals framed in the first place? Based on the worldview. This is the nature of the man. This is the purpose of human life. To fulfill these purposes, we are designing this system. That is how the ideals came about. This is not a explicitly stated process, which is the problem. The moment this becomes explicitly stated, this comes into the ambit of structured discourse. Then it becomes refutable. If it is refutable, then it becomes evolutionary as a system. So the causation is clear. To fulfill certain objectives, the state has been created this way, the Indian state. It was a British state, it had its objectives. Largely the objectives continue today, which is the main problem. And at these 4 levels, there is if there are documents, let us say the constitution is there, or acts are there, or policies are there, each of them are going to be of different nature. Some are ontological, some are prescriptive, some are normative, and they will have a different mode to change, to articulate, to modify also. So the consciousness wise, these are the four levels. The gross, whatever is visible; the subtle, what the institutional mechanism that channels all the outcomes into certain desirable outcomes. So basically, what does the institution do? It is directing all the collective efforts into certain desirable results. That's basically what the institution does. The how of it is the institution. The why is the doctrine. And there is also a corresponding text content, right? I mean, the ontology is what we find in our axiomatic sources, stated in the most general way, generic or impersonal, basically without application of any time-space constraint. The moment the time-space constraint applies, we have a temporal content which is more relatable to human condition, which is the Shastras basically. Which is why it is also normative in nature, because it can relate to human condition much better. So as we can see, constitution has both doctrine, it assumes the worldview, it doesn't state any worldview. There is a worldview, the liberal Protestant worldview is what is underlying all the constitution. But traditional texts actually have this breakdown of the four layers. The worldview is very clear in the axiomatic sources, which is the Shruti. The doctrine is visible in the Dharma Shastra by drawing upon the axiomatic source. So it has both ontological and the prescriptive, normative content. Then the Ardhashastra is basically fulfillment of the doctrine. So it has more detail of the instruments of the state to fulfill that objective which has been laid in the Dharma Shastra. And Niti is more policy level. So basically this layering is very clear, and the texts are separated so that system can evolve. Right? I mean, it's not one bundle called constitution that we have. It is broken down so that the decentralization applies as well as the time space separation is there.